In this video, I'm going to show you how to make my signature dovetail drawer, and if you stick to the end of the video, I will tell you the exact cost of building that kitchen unit. So the first thing that we start with is we use a marking gauge to mark the depth of our dovetails, which is essentially the thickness of our board, because this is a see-through dovetail. And then we mark the position of our tails. Now, there is a way to do that with a compass. I don't know how to do that. One of these days I'm gonna learn. So until that such day, I'm still using my combination square and an angle gauge. And then what we need to do is we clamp it on the vise and run our parallel lines on the edge of the wood. Then when it comes to cutting the tails, I follow the lines exactly as you can see here. Now right off the bat, I want to make a disclaimer. Those types of dovetails are usually used in the back of a drawer. On the front, you'd usually have a half-blind dovetail, and that becomes relevant in a few minutes when it comes to routing the grooves for our bottom, and I'll explain in a bit more detail when we get to that. But the reason I like using those ones on the front is that when you close the drawer, you can still see the end grain of the joint. I think it looks pretty cool. So that's why I call them my signature dovetail drawers. It's not like I've invented them. I just like using that one, and I use it quite a lot on a few of my projects, and a lot of my customers like them too. So we almost finished here with cutting the tails, and then once that's done, we can go ahead and mark the position for our pins. Now here's a little tip here. I've set up my pin piece the same height as my number 4 smoothing plane, so I can use it as a rest, and then I can mark my position of my pins. I'm using a pen. It would be a lot more accurate to use a knife, but I'm using a pencil for a reason. Now I draw my lines, and here I'm just continuing the lines with the square. However, when it comes to cutting them, I don't follow those lines, and you'll see that here I'm going about 1 millimeter before that, and that is for a reason. Now I will cut all of those pins like that, about 1 millimeter before the line. I will chop off the pieces, and then I would hand fit the actual joint. I've always done it that way. I think that's the right way of doing it, because if you do follow the lines, you're always running the risk of having too loose of a joint, and I want to have as tight joint as possible. So that's the technique I've always been using. And here we come to chopping off the pieces. Here's a great tip here for you. Don't follow the line of the marking gauge. I go about 1 millimeter in front of it, because when you first tap your mallet, the chisel is going to slide backwards slightly because of the bevel that it has. So and then after that, you have that wall that you can follow. So on this side, we're cutting half of the piece, and you can see I'm leaving a little bit of a lip, and that's for a reason, because in a minute I'm about to flip the piece to the other side and then cut it through. So I'm doing about half this side and half on the other side. But when I flip it over to the other side, I want it to have that lip so it can rest and it's not springy and bouncy. On the other side, however, it doesn't matter, so I'm just chopping it straight up now. I do have a coping saw. Some people like to remove the majority of the material with a coping saw. I've never been a big fan of that. I quite like doing them that way. In my opinion, this is just it's a nice way. It doesn't take that long. I can't remember. I think it took me a couple of minutes, so it's not that bad. And you can actually you can see what I was telling you about. So I'm going with a chisel now to start clearing those pins. Now I would remove some of the material, and then I'll try the piece, and then I'll keep repeating that process until we have a perfect joint. So as you can see me doing that now here, I'm using my Stanley knife. It's quite nice to get in those corners. You can do that with a chisel, but I found out over the years that just trimming those pieces in those internal corners with a Stanley knife, it's so much easier. Now the key at this stage is to do it slowly and methodically, and don't rush it, because if we are to rush it, we might end up with a joint that's a bit messed up. So once we get pretty close, we offer the piece and we can see where it's touching. Here we pretty much got it. So I've tapped it in with the mallet. It actually goes all the way in, but I wasn't 100% happy with it. I thought I can take 1 or 2 shavings off and have a joint that I was happy with. So that's exactly what I'm doing here now. I'm just taking a final couple of shavings. There's tiny ones, nothing too crazy. And then we get to routing the groove for our bottom. Now at this stage we've got to be very careful. As you see me zooming in, so I stop it halfway through the dovetail, because if I don't, it will go through the dovetail and that will be seen from the front. So normally on a half blind dovetail we can go all the way through it, because the half blind dovetail hides it, and hence we can use a plow plane. On these ones we can't. We have to use a router, and we have to be very careful to stop it. Now another thing I do is I would sand the inside of the pieces before I assemble it. You can do that once the drawer has been assembled, just easier to do it now when everything's in pieces. And this is what it's supposed to look. You see how that groove is stopping halfway through the dovetail, so it's not seen from the front. And we're doing the same thing with that piece here. I'll plunge the router and then I carry it all the way to the other side, but I don't do a complete pass. I'm careful to stop so we don't ruin the dovetails. Now if you're thinking that I could have just set up my router so I can avoid hitting the dovetails, I couldn't have. Now this is it's measured based on the plastic plates that I'm supposed to mount on the drawers, that the ones that are hooking to the undermount soft close drawer runners. So we have to use that dimension. Now here what we measure is from the top edge to the top edge of the groove, and this is so we can cut our back piece, because the back piece is narrower. And here's a little tip here. Now you see how this board is damaged. I knew that board was damaged and I saved it exactly for that piece, because I knew that I can cut that cracked piece off. Now a couple of little strokes with a smoothing plane, and then the back one you can use a dovetail, and I would love if you know, all of my joints can be dovetailed. However, I make these pieces for customers, and a budget is one of the things that we have to consider. So on the back one we can always put pocket holes. It's a great alternative because it's not going to be seen. We still have the beautiful joint on the front, but on the back we can just get away with our pocket holes, and that makes it a bit more budget friendly. Now we get to the glue up, and as you can see here I'm using my limited edition glue spreader, so don't you dare comment on that. And I just put some glue, spread it with my finger, as I had a friend of mine who used to say that you don't need a tool for something, you can do it with your finger. I miss Pete, he passed away in 2018. Anyways, so enough with the sad stuff. So we put the dovetails in, and then we put the back piece. I like to put a bit of glue on that one. It's not necessary to do that. The screws are strong enough to hold it, but it's a bit of an overkill, but I don't mind doing it. So I like to clamp it I put a clamp in there, and that way you can put some pressure on it and then screw it in that way. It's not necessarily, but that's how I like to do it. Just put all of my screws in. quite a simple one. And then I would actually clamp the dovetails. I hadn't done that previously because I wanted to attach the back, but now it gets to clamping the dovetails. Now when I clamp the dovetails, I would usually leave it for about, well, I'd say overnight. That's it's advisable if you leave it for 24 hours, but depending on the weather, 12 hours could be fine. So that was the next day. I'm just sanding and cleaning the dovetails. Now I can sand the outside of the drawer. I don't bother with the inside because I've already done that one. The outside, I'll just leave it for when the box is done. And then we cut the bottoms of it. So I'm using a 12mm birch ply. And then for a change, I'm actually going to use my plunge saw, which is not a tool that I get to use a lot, mainly because I like my circular saw better. But on this one, I thought might be a good idea to use it. Then off to the table saw. I've already measured and set it up to cut my width. And then here's a little tip. Now this is a 12mm birch ply. I'm saying it again, but I was using a 12mm bit to cut the groove, which makes the joint incredibly tight and it's almost impossible to slide it in. So I'm just breaking the edges with my little block plane, but that can only work with the grain. Against the grain, I'm using that sander set up with an 80 grit. Again, this is just to break the edges. It makes it easier to slide, otherwise it's an absolute pain. And then I'll go over with, I think that was 120 or 240, just to get a smooth finish. So a little bit of a bashing here to get the bottom in, and that's it. That's the bottom in, almost. Then we just need to nail it on the bottom. You can screw it. I like to use my nail gun. You can use, hammer and nails. There's many different ways to do it. I like to leave my bottom a little bit oversized, like a millimeter, and then shave it to size with some hand planes. That's a personal choice, because if you leave it too short, it kind of leaves a little bit of recess and it drives me mad. It's one of the things that hurts my brain. But yeah, that's basically what we're doing here. Just finishing it, and then we get to the integrated door pull. Now this is one thing I love because it's such a simple solution. So you don't have to put a handle, and these drawers are inside of a cupboard anyway, so it makes perfect sense. So I've made a jig for that one. I'm using a router, and actually for a change I'm using safety glasses, but that was mainly because the router was so high that it was chucking shavings in my face. You can actually see them on my shoulder. So I'm using my jig with a template bit. You can see that here, just to get rid of all of the material. So I usually set up both of my routers. So the 1/2 inch router, I use it with my template bit so I can cut the shape of the pull, and then I use my 1/4 inch router to do a chamfer, just so I can break the edge. Then that's another great little tip here. I'm using sandpaper on a dowel. It's quite handy for those curves. Otherwise they could be quite difficult to get to. And then the final stage is oiling up. I like to use a brush. Over the years I've used cloth many times, but it's quicker with a brush. The finish is pretty much the same. I say pretty much, it's exactly the same. So yeah, I like to use brush when oiling up drawers. It's easier to get in those corners with a brush. That's my reasoning behind why I don't use a cloth. So as we're getting to the end of this video, and as promised, I will let you know what the cost of building that unit was. So the end price for our customer was just under £3,000 for that unit, and that includes delivery, installation and painting on site. I would really appreciate if you let me know in the comments whether you think this is cheap, expensive or reasonably priced. However, I would ask you not to put the price in the comments. That way I would know that anyone who's commented on that has actually watched the video to the end. As always, thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.